Welcome to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. Today's guest is Sirry Berndsen. She is a certified medium with the Forever Family Foundation, a past life regression therapist, and a grief recovery method specialist. Today we're going to be talking about her work as well as what you can expect from a qualified medium. Sirry, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Johnny, for inviting me to the show.
How did you find yourself on the mediumship path? What came first, the past life regression therapy, or was it the mediumship?
So the mediumship definitely came first. I was actually born this way, and most mediums that are practicing today, I would say most of them, they were born this way. And so we have this attunement to the spirit world that happens in the womb, and then we're born this way. And so a lot of the mediums that are born this way, they're very quirky, and they have the invisible friends when they're kids. But I actually became an atheist when I was early teen. I was probably like about 12 years old, and I was an atheist from early teens into my 20s. And I didn't believe anything. I just thought that when you died, you went into the earth and that was it. I had actually been living in different places of the world. I had lived in different parts of Scandinavia, and then I also lived in Paris for a little while, and then in Holland, and then in the Middle East, and then I came to America. I had a pretty bad experience my first or second year in America. I was attacked. When that happened, it was definitely a crossroad in my life. After that happened, I was so devastated naturally by what happened. I went into a deep depression, and then thankfully I did have a lot of help around me. I had therapy and whatnot. But there was something in my heart that told me to look for meaning in life. Like I really had to find meaning in life. And so I don't know what it was that nudged me and pushed me. And I actually went to a spiritualist church. And I still remember the day vividly that I went to a spiritualist church, and there was a medium on the platform, and I'm good friends with her today. She was giving messages from the spirit world, and this is what totally changed my life. It transformed my life in a second. She was giving a message to a woman who was obviously from either Thailand or maybe the Philippines. And so Jackie was giving a message from my mother. And then Jackie doesn't speak any other language but English. And the moment that changed my life is when Jackie said, "Well, I hear your mother saying this." And then she said something that nobody that day understood except the young woman who was receiving the message. And she just she gasped. And she said, "Oh my God, that was my mother saying, I love you." And this was in a foreign language. This was in some sort of an Asian language that changed my life forever. And I remember myself looking at Jackie, and I said, if I was ever to learn to do this, I want to be as good as she is. And that's how my journey started.
That was the trigger then? That event.
That was a moment that changed my life. Seeing her and realizing that there's life after death. It was such a profound moment. Since then, I started taking classes, but within the first few weeks in the classes, apparently what I heard from my friends is like, you sat there and it was like natural to you. When I was in these classes in the first years, I never understood what the big deal was. I would see them and I would communicate with them and I would deliver messages. And so it was that part of my brain that I used when I was studying on creating art. It's that creative mind.
The right side.
It is exactly the right side. And so also, like, for instance, when I work, I hear the spirits on the right hand side. I'm extremely visual. I have a phenomenal imagination, but I know when it comes to the mediumship, I know when to not go too far. Like, what is my imagination and what is really truly coming through. So that is what defines a really good medium, knowing that fine line.
Now, you had mentioned before that you think it's an innate ability. You're born with it.
Most mediums are born with it, but everyone can learn how to do this. It's the same thing with singing. Like, I would never be a singer, but I've taken one singing lesson. Everyone can learn how to sing, but will everyone be standing at the front of the stage? No. Will there people be in the choir that are not really that good? Absolutely. It's the same idea.
So you are indeed certified by the Forever Family Foundation based on what we're seeing today, because it seems like I'm seeing mediums and spiritual advisors and those type of people just everywhere. How important is the certification and what does it mean in the context of what we're seeing?
So I think the certification is really essential, and I'll tell you why. Like I said, everyone can go and learn how to do this, but then the testing that I did for the Forever Family Foundation, there's such a low percentage that actually does pass the testing. Apparently, it's thousands of people that actually do connect with the foundation and ask if they can go through the testing, and they have to have an interview, they have to have their heart in the right place, and then they also fill out a lot of paperwork. And then when they do the testing, when I did it a few years ago, I think I did 6 readings back to back in one day. Now they've changed it, and I think they do 5 readings one day after the next. And when we do this, the evidence, it has to be so crystal clear that there's no question. Before the tests, I do not know who I'm reading for. So this was in the early days of Skype. I just saw the faces popping up on the screen, and then I had to give a reading for, I think it was half an hour. And the evidence had to be really unquestionable. I actually passed the test on the first go. There are some mediums, they've tried it out a couple of times and then they've passed it. But I think only about 10% of mediums actually get through the testing itself.
What are the chances there's mediums out there that actually look to be legitimate?
If there are mediums out there that have sort of done this for a little while and they have some experience, I definitely encourage them to contact the Forever Family Foundation, because we need more good mediums. We need more evidential mediums, because when you have the evidence and you cannot question the evidence that is coming through, then you know that you have someone that is truly connected to the spirit world, because the spirit world is right here with us. Like, they live with us. I see it as 2 worlds living together in harmony.
Just on a different frequency?
Yeah, I look at it as a frequency, and I've been really interested in frequency lately, like the different hertz frequency. I find it fascinating, because they've also been testing mediums. I know that Yale University, they've been testing mediums, and also the DOPS in Virginia, the Department of Perceptual Studies, they've been testing mediums and brainwaves and so on. There's mediums on every corner, and there are some mediums that are quite good. But I think also when someone who is grieving, when they go and they seek out a medium, if the information that is coming through, if it doesn't resonate, that person should have the power to say, I'm really sorry, but I don't think you're connected with my husband or wife or a child or whoever that is. They should have the courage to stand up and say thank you, but I just don't think this is working. Because there's a lot of frauds. There's a lot of frauds in the business, sadly.
There is.
Yeah.
With COVID and that whole mess that we're in now, that just amplifies the number of needy, desperate people. But I think you had a really good point about the evidential mediumship. If someone is able to tell me about something about my dad that there's no way they could have known that,
right,
it's a pretty good guess that they're connected.
Yes.
While we're on that subject, let's say someone goes to a medium and has it in their mind, I want to contact my friend Dan or my friend Elizabeth or my father. What information should they give and what information should they not give?
So when a person seeks out a medium, every medium is different. Every medium is unique. There are some mediums, they actually have assistants. And those mediums, they tend to charge higher prices because they have to pay the assistants. Now, in my case, I have everything automated on my computer. And so a person will go on my website and then they book the session. And then I get a notification email that I never look at it. On the day of my readings, I look at my calendar and I see who am I reading for? I don't want to know anything. So I don't care if people give me a fake last name, but as long as they have the first name that is a real name, and I don't care if they have a fake email, but it has to be an email that they look at regularly, because that is where I will be doing the communication, as in sending the recordings, but I don't need anything else from them. And so then when they come into my office or they have a Zoom session with me, then I have to be the one being able to provide the evidence. So I connect with the spirit world. And how I work also is this way, that oftentimes I will have 1 or 2 people that are not that significant. They will pop in the beginning just saying hello, and then I sort of move them out of my energy. And then I will have what I call the star of the show. They take up most of the time. But every medium is different, because I also know the mediums, they will bring up maybe 6 or 7 different people in the spirit world that will be coming through. My experience is usually when someone seeks me out, they've lost someone that was really dear to them, and I kind of know that that's the person that they really want to spend time with.
When someone has lost someone recently, do you suggest a certain waiting time of their grieving so they get past it, or do you not necessarily do that?
This is a great question. So here's the deal. In the spirit world, there is no time. And this is something that is really hard for us humans to understand. There's no time in the spirit world. It's a place of timelessness. Just for the sake of grieving, it is suggested that people, they wait 3 months. Most really, really good mediums, they have a waiting list of maybe 2 years. I used to have a waiting list of 6 months. I refused to book further out than 6 months. But at one point, I had 500 people on a waiting list. Since this past year, 2020, my business plummeted. Everyone started canceling the sessions. And so that waiting list and the 6-month wait time, is sort of, it went away. If somebody wants to book with me today, there's probably going to be like maybe 6-week waiting list today instead of 6 months. If someone passes in between, let's say somebody books a session and they lost the grandpa, and they book a session with the intention of just connecting with the grandpa. But then let's say in that 6 weeks time period, somebody else passed away. Usually they can come through. But what my experience has been is that a person that is new in the spirit world, they feel lighter than those that have been there longer. And the only way that I can explain this is like, it's for them, they have to learn a new language. And so they may have the sort of the base of it, of the language, but then they have to really learn how to pull the strings. And I tend to know when people are new in the spirit world, it feels like they feel shared, they feel more translucent, if I can say that, and they feel lighter. And they will be pulling on strings with me. And then also, I oftentimes have another spirit with them that is showing them how to pull the strings. It's kind of like playing with marionettes.
Really? It almost sounds as if the newer spirits are still kind of shaking off the density of the earth life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you could say that, yeah.
Well, I was just really concerned more about the grief. They should probably wait a little bit and not go there the next day or the next week.
That's a really good point. The first year of grief can be sort of spent in a haze or in a fog. And people, they understand cognitively, yes, they loved when they passed away. But then my experience, when the first year anniversary hits, the grief becomes that much deeper. And so for the sake of grief, yes, I would say 3 months, then come and see me. But even that year, like there are a lot of times like people, they're still so shook up. They're unsure like how to respond. And everyone is different when it comes to grief. Some people, they completely collapse, and some people, they kind of like hold it together, but then they may collapse later on in terms of like emotional grief and all that. So yeah, 3 months is a good time, but 6 months is also a good time. But grief is such a personal thing.
I would think so. Speaking of connecting with spirits and such, what other kind of beings other than earth beings, angels, spirit guides, do they come into the session or?
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic. I'm not really a religious person, although I've attended spiritualist churches, and I've done that because they have no Bible, they have no book. There's nothing that they base it on, like you have to do it this way. I'm one of these people that you can never tell me what to do and I'll figure things out. So when it comes to angels or higher beings, because I was not raised with a religion, I didn't really understand what angels were when I first started doing this. So when it comes to the higher beings, we all have guides, and we tend to have one main guide, but we also tend to be born into soul groups. And so we have that like a helping hand from the higher side. And then with these soul groups from the other side onto the earth plane, oftentimes we are reincarnated within the same soul group. But then that said, then there's the angels. Now, since I'm not really an angel person, I have been less interested in the angelic realm. I know that it's there, and I will acknowledge them when they do come through for people in a reading. But I had an experience a few years ago in Massachusetts. I was in a group of people, probably 10 or 15 people were in one room. And we did this experiment that had to do with sound. The person who was leading the group is a musician, and they had created this CD and they played this music, and it was a very interesting vibration to the music. And they had set the room up in such a way that it was a circle. And then we sat in this sound thing that just reverberated through a room, and then with crystals around us. And then once we came out of it, we came out of this very, very deep healing energy. People started speaking up and they started saying, oh, did you notice the aliens? And me being the skeptic, I thought, oh my God, I was not the only one. And the greatest skeptic of them all, he said the same thing, like, oh my God, I thought I was going crazy. So we had about 15 people in one room that all experienced the same thing, experienced as if they were aliens in the room. And that also was transformative to me. And then for one very specific moment, I was down in Key West, and I find Key West fascinating for the energy. And early morning one day, I was waking up and it was the crack of dawn. I was waking up with the sun, and I was lying underneath a window and it was half open. And I felt like there were people or someone or something that was just staring at me. And I realized that just as I can do the mediumship, I realized that I could throw out a thought, and I was getting responses back, and I found it absolutely fascinating. So there I was at the crack of dawn, and I was having this communication with what we would call aliens. But one of the most important things that I learned that day was they do not like to be called aliens. They want to be called star beings.
Okay.
So we humans, we call them aliens. And what I learned that day is that they found that to be kind of derogatory. And so star beings was the term that they wanted to use. And I had a long conversation with them. And then I tried to memorize as much as I could. And it had to do with why is that we cannot see with the naked eye. What I learned then is that they have this skin that is like a camouflage, that they can walk along walls and they can become just like a chameleon. And I found that fascinating. And I was never into quote unquote aliens. I was just never interested in it. But that was another one of those moments. Then I had another one after that. But then also some years later, I was having a conversation with a young man. And this was in upstate New York at Omega. And somehow we started talking about the star beings, the same term. We had this just absolutely fascinating conversation about star beings and how they communicate and how they can be seen and how we can tune into their frequency if you want to.
So they do exist. I think we all appreciate the example of that group where 15 of you all found the same thing. So it's not like you're imagining the same thing. Your work in past life regression therapy, how has that informed your mediumship, or is it the other way around?
Well, so many people had been studying past life regression, and I thought it was interesting. And then I actually read a book by Dr. Brian Weiss, Many Lives, Many Masters, and then I read Only Love is Real. So I actually went to the course and studied it. But then after that, a whole new door went wide open, because then I actually read the book Destiny of Souls and Journey of Souls by Dr. Michael Newton. And then it was interesting to me when I actually read that book, all of my work that I had been doing up to that point, it started falling into place. It just made sense. I tend to break things down and I try to analyze with a very critical mind. I try to understand things on a deeper level. I'm not one of these mediums like, oh yeah, your mom comes through and she says she's love you. I'm not that type of medium. When I'm in my mediumship, I will pick and pick and pick at the things that need healing and the things where the love is coming and the gratitude. I will go on this roller coaster of emotions. So when it came to understanding the past lives and how all of that connects to the life here and now, then you also begin to understand what was, what is, and what will be, in the sense that we are responsible for our lives here and now. The good or the bad that we do here and now is most likely connected to the past, but it also will be connected to the future. And so on a soul level, how we live our lives really is affected by both pasts and the future. Oh, it's all connected.
Going back to your point of the work of Dr. Michael Newton, Destiny of Souls and Journey of Souls, I think for a lot of people that really did make a lot of sense, because it does open up a whole new world. But the karma and the life between lives, I think that's really important. When you speak with spirit or the source or whatever you want to call it, why do you think they want to be in contact with us?
So I think that it gives us hope. I think that when grief happens, it can be so heart-wrenching that we as humans, we need to find hope. One of the things that I have learned is that how a person passes, oftentimes, and this is more with religion than anything else, that oftentimes how a person passes, there's judgment within it. It is the same thing, like, how a person thinks and opinions and all of these things, there's always opinions with everything. But for instance, if a person passes when they're very, very young, that it has such devastating impact on people, no matter who they are, to the parents, to the siblings, to all of the relatives. And for instance, when somebody passes from a suicide, the greatest danger is to bring in religion and say that, oh my God, they must be going to hell and whatnot. That is actually not the case, because we all have a destiny. We all have a path, and we all have exits at certain points. And even people that have really got into past lives, they talk about these exits, and we all have those, like those doors. And so, for instance, if somebody has a long-term illness, people that get a chance to say their goodbyes, they get a chance to say all the things that they want to say. And what is interesting, that people feel like they're in a rush to do the things that they need to do and say the things that they needed to say. But what is interesting is that the spirits, the dead people, they hear us and they see us all the time. If we want to connect with them, they're always by our side. But it's because we are of a lower vibration and we have these human feelings that we need to work through and we need to experience. So when a spirit comes through, it's about love. It's about sharing the love and also acknowledging pain that was caused to someone, because we as human beings, we just have these two eyeballs and we just see what is in front of us. But when we die, we have this enormous awareness. We see everything that we have said and done. And so when a spirit comes through, it's always with the message of love. But oftentimes, depending on the relationship with the person that comes into the office or has the reading, depending on the relation with the sitter, as we call them, and the spirits, they may bring up old things that happened. And when they bring it up, they highlight it and they bring forth this profound forgiveness. And so when these things happen, when they do come through, it's really a message of forgiveness and of love. I would say those are the two major things that people want to acknowledge. And the forgiveness is both ways. So for instance, if a mother brought a child to a hospital and let's say the child just had like a bad cough or something, but then something goes wrong in the hospital and then the mother has to live with the guilt of having brought in the child into the hospital. So the forgiveness can go both ways. It's from the spirit realm to here, but also then, for instance, the mother or the father knowing that the child lives on. The power of forgiveness that can connect the two can be really, really profound, like the child then forgiving the parent for bringing them into the hospital. I think that on a soul level, life is really about love and forgiveness and the power of that.
I would agree. Regarding the souls that committed suicide, why do you suppose there's so much speculation that they were going to the lower depths of the spirit world or they're going to a not good place? Why do you suppose that is?
So this was my experience. When I started doing the mediumship, I was so depressed. I was one of these people, like I was thinking like, oh, it'd be just as easy just to end it all and just leave. Now in hindsight, thankfully I didn't do that because I would not have learned the lessons that I need to learn in the past 20 years. I think that people that have a higher awareness and people that have a deeper understanding of the journey of the soul, they tend to be more forgiving and more loving. And they tend to be far less judgmental towards those that actually decided to take their own life. So I think a lot of it comes from religion. Let's say, for instance, if someone's son decides to end their life, son or daughter, naturally they must have been going through a really tough time, depression and whatnot. And they decide to end it all because they can no longer cope with it. There's the grief from the parent and the family and the guilt. The guilt is enormous. Like they were not able to save them. But when people pass, we as mere mortals, we have to understand that we do not have the power, nor should we ever judge how a person passes. There's these exits that we have in our lives. You could be driving down the street. You could be walking down the street. You could be hit by a car. You could be going swimming and you could drown. For whatever reason, we tend to hold such weight on it. And I think we need to find a way to release it because then we can heal the trauma of the generation that comes after, the person who ends up doing this.
That's a really good point about the trauma. It doesn't last for just the immediate family and that immediate generation goes a little bit farther. So between your work as a medium, which you've been doing for quite some time, and with the past life regression therapy experience, what has spirit taught you about how the spirit world works in terms of levels and where someone can expect to go?
So this is a great question. This is purely based on my experience in the last 2 decades. When a person passes, and let's say this person was just up to no good, they did a lot of harm to others, then I see the levels as going to school. And I'm going to share with you, actually, this was all over the news a few years ago in Massachusetts. I actually did a reading for the family. A number of years ago, there was a man who decided to take the life of his ex-girlfriend. So a man and a woman, they had been dating for quite a while, and then the woman just decided it just wasn't working out. She also had 3 daughters. The man decides to go into the house and with a gun, and he shoots the mother and he shoots the dog and he shoots 2 daughters. One of the daughters was away in Florida. And so what happened was that the daughter who was away in Florida, she's trying to call her mom and mom is not picking up the phone. So she gets really worried. And so she calls her dad and she said, "Dad, please go and check up on mom." And so dad goes over to the house and he finds them. And what is interesting is that the 2 girls survived. So they lived to tell the story. And the mom actually sadly passed away. Now, later on, the man, he committed suicide. So what is interesting, when the mom came through, one of the family members, they asked, "Well, where is the guy who did this?" And she said, "Well, he is in this. And in my perception, it looked like an interrogation room. So while he is here in this room and he cannot see me, but I can see him." He was in a room with his guides and with his helpers because he had to be shown the atrocity that he had caused to the whole entire family with the murder-suicide. And so him being in this room, because there's no time in the spirit world, there was no indicator of how long he would be there. But that was the moment that I realized that when people pass away and they've done just horrible things, they end up in a space where they go through, quote unquote, therapy. And they will have their main guide with them. They will have other people, angels and angelic beings, and helping them learn the cause and effect. Meanwhile, in this case, the mother, she was the one that continued watching for her daughters very closely. Since then, whenever I receive someone that comes through in the spirit world that has done harm to others, I see them as being maybe in kindergarten, maybe in preschool, sometimes in 1st grade, depending on the things that they have done. So they end up in classrooms. And in this guy's case, my perception was that he ended up in this isolation room, almost like it was a special ed, but not like we understand special ed, because special ed here is to help people learn better. In that case, it was really intense. It's like spirit therapy.
So even the spirit worlds have therapists. That's actually quite cool. At the top of our episode here, I mentioned something about the explosion of mediumship as a cautionary tale. But the other side of that is, do you think it could have something to do with what a lot of people call the awakening or the ascension, where a lot of people are maybe looking at this wave and say, well, I'd like to surf that wave, but could it be that maybe some people just don't have the experience or are not qualified?
The explosion of mediums, I think it actually happened in the mid-19th century. There was an explosion of mediums. There were seances all over the place. And this was also during the time of the spiritualists sort of coming up, and also the suffragettes and so on and so on. So that was a time period with the explosion of mediums. In later days, it actually came about with John Edward when he was on TV with Crossing Over. And then there was Lisa Williams. And later on, we had Kim Russo. James from Prague was also on TV. So that was kind of like the early days of mediumship in the media. Fast forward about 20 years later. It's interesting when we say this, that about 20 years ago, and then in 2020, with this whole awakening, my impression these days with this explosion of awakening, I think it has to do with people being fed up with what was. I think that people are looking for deeper meaning in life. I think that people are looking for connectedness. And I think it is still a little bit like walking through the Amazon. And I think a lot of people are fed up with the leaders, the general leaders of the world. I think that every society goes through these cycles. I see the next few years unfolding in such a way that we have this division going on right now. I'm going to say this also, like, I'm an immigrant in America. I don't understand, just because I didn't grow up here, I don't understand why it is that there's always such a division. I remember like the first year that I came to America, it's like all these labels, and I thought to myself, like, I feel like a Christmas tree is like Christmas ornaments. I don't think the labels are really, really healthy, because I think that what labels do, they tend to divide us. I think that if we can shed the labels a little bit more, we can become true in our essence without all of these labels. I understand, like, you have a label that you are a radio show host and you are a musician and I am a medium. All of these labels, what they're doing, they're just sort of narrowing us down onto this path, like you have to be this or that, and there's no freedom anymore to think or to be or to flow. And I think 2020, that has become this great awakening as the people are trying to find deeper meaning. Politicians are disappointing people, and they have not been willing to change. And I think that people are just fed up with the corruption and
the messaging, the disinformation, and so on. It seems like the ascension or the awakening is almost reactionary to the divisiveness, because it's basically in a completely different direction, trying to find higher ground, higher spiritual ground.
I think also, like, the year 2020 in the United States, we came to a standstill and people were given time to dig deeper. And I know myself, I started digging deeper, a whole lot deeper. I turned off my TV a year ago. And I woke up this morning, I didn't understand, like, somebody was saying something about, like, the clock being different. I thought, oh, we changed the clocks.
I did the same thing. I didn't know until I looked at my cell phone and my alarm clock is different. The only time I watch TV is to watch Netflix and sports, not anything else.
You see, I'm the same way. So I have started choosing what I feed my own soul. I will not be bombarded with information from others. I will not be controlled. It really has come down to this. The ones that are sort of waking up, the ones that are opening up our hearts and our souls, I think we are sort of waking up to this amazing light underworld. The light always wins in the end. Love always ascends.
John Lennon was right. Love is all you need. Love is the answer. It's starting to make a lot of sense. And on one last note, I think, yes, the light will be victorious over the dark, but I believe the light has to shine the light on the dark so we actually can see it.
I absolutely agree. And I think to add on to that, I think that so many people that have gone bankrupt and so many people lost everything. They lost their houses. They lost their farms. It's absolutely devastating. I think that we now are able to see that, yes, there's this power of money around us, but we do not need to be a part of it. All we should be doing is we should be greeting one another with love and with kindness and without harshness. There's always this harshness. If we find an easier way to communicate through love and not with this aggression, I think aggression is one of the worst things. My boundaries have become quite strict these days, because if someone comes at me with derogatory terms in any way, shape or form, my life is sacred. And I will not invite anyone who is violating my peace and privacy. I live in a very mindful world. I live in a very peaceful world, and I don't have aggression. I just don't live that whole life.
I think that's a good model. And as we mentioned before, it seems very simplistic, but after talking about important topics, the things that come up the most, there's only 3 of them: love, forgiveness, and compassion, over and over and over again. Sirry, thanks so much for joining us today. There was a lot of really great information in today's session. How can our listeners find you online?
So my website is spiritoflight.com. That's spiritoflight.com. Also, if they do put in sirryberndsen.com, they should go to the same sites. And so that's how they find me. And I do have Facebook, and I also have an Instagram. No, but I think that through my website and email is best, because I actually ended up shutting down my phone.
Can't blame you for that, but I'll definitely put those links into the show notes. You've been listening to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing. If you really liked it, please consider leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.